Welcome to part 4 of Let's Play The Legend of Zelda. In the last part we did Dungeon 3 where we got the raft, which we're gonna need to get into Dungeon 4. But before that, a few things in the overworld, and by a few things I mean one. Most of this part is gonna be spent inside Dungeon 4 itself. Before that, however, when I was playing this I saw that I had more rupees than I was planning to have at this point, so I decided I could afford to show off one of the pay me for the door repairs, old man. So the ones that take rupees away from you, which is a stupid mechanic because in the first place you don't know where the secrets are, and then when you actually find a secret you can't know ahead of time if it's a good or a bad one. And there are quite a number of these on the map, so if I were to run into these as a kid I would want to stop exploring, meaning I wouldn't be able to find a lot of the potion shops, a lot of the heart containers or the secret to everybody moblins, speaking of which. This particular secret to everybody moblin gives you 100 rupees and there are only 3 of those in the entire map, so try to be careful with when you use this one. For example, before I went in there just now I had 175 rupees, so there are 20 rupees I didn't get from that, because rupees cap at 255. So I was gonna get maxed out on rupees from that anyway, that's why I figured I could show off the pay me for the door repairs man. By the way, what door repairs? He lives in a bush. But now that we have 255 rupees, we're going back to the expensive shop where we can buy the blue ring. And again, the blue ring costs 250 rupees, so it basically costs all of your rupees except for those 5 you're left with. And obviously it's the most expensive item in the game, since you really can't get any more expensive than that. You also can't pay for things in multiple payments. You can't say I'll give you 200 rupees now and you get the other 50 later. Also have to deal with this guard thing again. You know, dude, you run a pretty good shop, it's just, why do you make it such a pain in the ass to get in here? Anyway, it's blue ring time. Hope you weren't enjoying Link's iconic green color scheme, because for the rest of the game, as soon as the rupees stop counting down and when we exit the shop, we're gonna be wearing a new tunic. Less iconic, less visible, but it does give us a defense increase, so things that did 2 hearts of damage at first now only do 1 heart of damage, and things that did 1 heart of damage only do half a heart of damage now. So pretty much a 50% less chance of dying, so I'd say it's worth the 250 rupee price tag. You can get this earlier, but like I said before, I get things when they are convenient, not necessarily as soon as I can. Also, speaking of defenses, I don't think I really explained the shield that Link has on his sprite. It's not just for show. It can be used to block a few projectiles, mainly rocks and arrows, so right now it can only really be used in the overworld, since you never run into moblins and octoroks inside the dungeons. And what you just saw right there was the use of the raft. Pretty much it's only used to get into this dungeon. We use it one more time later on to get 1 heart container, and then we're never gonna look at it again. With that said, welcome to Dungeon 4, the Snake Dungeon. As the name implies, we're gonna be doing a lot of zigzagging in here. Really not that much to talk about in here, but we're still gonna be here for the rest of this video, so let's talk development history. I brought this up during the Mario All-Stars playthrough, but this game was being developed at the same time as the original Super Mario Bros., so whenever they were coming up with the ideas, they split them into what would fit The Legend of Zelda better and what would fit Mario better. So one became a cartoony platformer and the other one became a fantasy exploration game. The whole exploration gameplay was based on Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of both Mario and Zelda. He as a kid really enjoyed exploring in real life, so going into the forest and going around looking for stuff, and that's what he eventually based this game on. Link himself was based on Peter Pan, the whole pointy ears, green tunic, hanging around with fairies, and in later games he even fights his own shadow like Peter Pan. Though the reason his name is Link comes from an idea they scrapped very early on, where originally he was gonna be time traveling between the past and the future, and the main character was supposed to be the link between those 2 timelines. They decided not to do that very early on, so now the game is just purely fantasy setting and the name is sort of a leftover. But that's also why other games are called A Link to the Past or A Link Between Worlds. I may have brought this up before, but at some point they were planning to have Hyrule's religion just be Christianity, which is why Link has a cross on his shield. And one more piece of development history is that in very early screenshots they showed that the old man that gives you the sword at some point gave you the option between picking the sword and the boomerang. That's all the development history trivia I have for you today, but there's more trivia to come later when it's relevant. One of them I can actually bring up right now as soon as I light up this room, is that those blocks you can find all over the dungeon, the ones that block your path or you sometimes have to push to reveal a secret passage or open a door. Exact same graphic as in the original Mario Brothers. Also, all the dungeons, in terms of their layout, they can all sort of fit into each other, like one giant game of Tetris. For example, the bottom of the Moon Dungeon can fit into the right bottom of the Swastika, the Manji Dungeon! The Manji Dungeon. Let's see if there's more stuff I need to bring up. Yes, I actually have a correction to make. In the first part I talked about the 3 pieces of the Triforce. The Triforce of Courage, Triforce of Power and Triforce of Wisdom. I forgot to bring up that the Triforce of Courage technically doesn't exist in this game yet, so it's more of a dual force. The Triforce of Wisdom that we are restoring and the Triforce of Power that Ganon has. But we can just sort of assume that this Link has the Triforce of Courage, even though it's not really ever said in a menu or anything. But I mean, it's called the Triforce. Then again, that might have more to do with the fact that it's a triangle, not necessarily that there are 3 of them, but who cares? With that out of the way, I also promised to talk about the second quest. The second quest is pretty much a hard mode of the game that you unlock after you beat the game once, though you can also unlock it by, on the name select, selecting your name as Zelda. Which in a way, I can imagine some kid who thought the main character's name was Zelda because the game is called The Legend of Zelda, that he actually called the character Zelda, so he was accidentally thrown into the second quest. But like I said, the second quest is pretty much a hard mode of the game that likes to throw a lot of curveballs at you, and enemies are harder, dungeons are in different locations and have different layouts. I think the overworld for the most part has the same layout, but everything is in a different place. That one unimportant bush in the overworld is now all of a sudden the final dungeon or something. Also, new enemies, these are likes and they will try to eat you, but they're not anything to be afraid of yet. They have a certain attribute that right now isn't really relevant, but they will be later and I'll explain it then. In the meantime, we're about to get the dungeon item of Dungeon 4, this is the Stepladder. Like the raft, it's a water related item, just 20 times more useful. With the Stepladder you can stand on a space with water as long as it's connected to wherever ground is. And you also can't move it around as you're standing on a Stepladder, but you can use it to cross water as long as it's only one space wide. As you can see right about here. So yeah, it's not the most useful thing in the world, but it makes navigating rooms like these a bit easier. Also, you can use it to get to the upper left side of the overworld a lot quicker, since if you don't have the Stepladder, you'd have to go all the way around and through the graveyard, and it's a pain in the ass. Also, like what I do here, I never really use the candle as a weapon, but when I have to use it anyway to light up the room, might as well hit an enemy with it. This room is also an example of when bubbles might be annoying, because you're gonna see it a few times here. I'm about to hit the enemy and then I get hit by the bubble, so I can't hit the enemy unless I use the boomerang. I also have the tendency to, whenever I get hit by bubbles, to suddenly mash the attack button, so I know when I can use my sword again. Also, I don't know why I'm even bothering, because there are a lot of places where you can just ignore the enemies and go on to the next room, unless you have to kill the enemies to open the door, but I keep forgetting that. I just have the tendency to kill everything in sight. That sounded a bit morbid. Then again, that's kind of something that bothers me about Link being a silent protagonist, is that we're just supposed to assume he fights his way through enemies because he's brave and tries to save the world. Where I can also just assume that maybe Link is just a maniac who enjoys killing things. I mean, it's not like he says that isn't true because he doesn't say anything. And then we can also just assume that Hyrule is maybe really fucked up for praising this ruthless killer as their hero. That's kind of a problem with stories with silent protagonists where you're just supposed to assume everything. Oh, hi Benhandla, again. But that's why I get really stingy when people don't know the difference between story and immersion, because I got into The Legend of Zelda because people told me that it has a great story, and then I played the games and never found any of it. I'll say this time and time again, but I just can't get into a story where you might as well replace your character with a cardboard box and people can still praise him the same way and talk about him the same way, because it's not just us having to assume things about Link or Ganondorf for that matter, it's other people within the games themselves assuming things about them. It's like whenever someone tells Link, like, you must be surprised to see how yabba-dabba-dab-dab, and Link responds with. And that always irritates me, because they also have so much more potential for story, especially with, what if we had a Link that didn't want to be some sort of chosen one, or Ganondorf not just being boring, cliché evil. Most Zelda games just tend to be missing character and personality to really consider anything a story. Link's Awakening and Majora's Mask have character because they don't involve the guy who doesn't speak other than his actual actions, and that works better with the immersion and combination with the story. But alas, it seems they wish to settle in the most mediocre and basic form of video game storytelling. Which is a shame because there are so many video games that just tell a good story while still bringing in the whole video game aspect. I just wish that the Zelda series would live up to that potential, but oh well, rant over. Back to what's happening in this game. A few screens ago we ran into another old man hint, and that was also actually a pretty clear one. That was walk into the waterfall, so if you manage to recognize the 8-bit waterfall then you should be good. But the thing there is that when you do walk into the waterfall, all you find is an old woman who will ask for free amounts of money, and when you give the lowest amount of money she will say that you're a cheapskate and she ain't telling you shit, or something along those lines. And when you give her too much rupees, she also doesn't tell you shit. So it's only when you give like the middle amount of rupees where she will give you a very vague hint. So the whole walk into a waterfall thing is a good hint for the sake of getting to a vague hint that you also have to pay for, and with a chance that you're paying for nothing. So even the good hints are stupid. Also, another dragon boss fight. Didn't we already fight a dragon, but with one head? This one has two. Though compared to the first dragon, this one is slightly more of a challenge as you have to hit the body and try to avoid the heads. Also, when you do enough damage, the heads will fly off and start bouncing around the room and fire at you. But if you have enough health when you get to this point, you can afford to take a hit, and you might also have a potion with you, so still not that big of a deal. But that is Dungeon 4 done and over with. Join me next time in part 5 of Let's Play The Legend of Zelda. See you then.